Today's stuff we're going to be learning is Bava Batra Daf Kuf Nun Gimel. We're going to get started from the end with the Pumpadita. Okay, I'm going to actually clarify a little bit. I can't remember now exactly how I translated it, but I have it much more clear today. So we're going to start. Always the end of the Daf sometimes is not as clear to me. We're going to start with Girsa Pumpadita. I'll just do a quick review. We had a bunch of different machlokot of Rav and Shmuel. We're going to continue with another machlokot of Rav and Shmuel about different kinds of matno shchimera. We had one where it's a star that had a kinyan written in it, that they actually did a kinyan. And the question was, does that mean it's really effective from right now, that Rav said? And Shmuel said, no, it's not. The question is, why did he add the extra? Anyway, but Shmuel said maybe add the extra because he wanted to make sure that it was only done with the star, and you can't do star la'achar mita. Then we had some other cases where we were questioning, and we kind of discussed the differences between the cases. I'm not going to go back to that. Then we had a case of katav v'zika lezeh and katav v'zika lezeh. So you wrote the star and then gave it to someone, but then you decided to give it to someone else, while you were on your deathbed. So Rav says the first one is effective because, again, why did you give the star to someone to take it on behalf of the other person, if not because you wanted to show, I want this to be final? And Shmuel said, you're a shchimera. You have the right to continually change your mind. And again, if you want to learn more in depth about this whole law about shchimera and the idea behind it, you can listen to Din and Daf this week of Alana Steinheim about this whole idea, from a more conceptual framework. Now, we ended with, in Pumbedita, they had a different girsa, and I mentioned that there's different opinions about exactly what this different girsa was. One possibility that the Rashbam raises and rejects is that Shmuel says, okay, the case was, basically, it says here, Rabbeinu Shchimera Shkatav Kon Lechasav Lachirim B'Kanumi Adom at the bottom of yesterday's daf. A Shchimera that wrote all of his possessions to other people and then did a kinyan. What's the case? And Shmuel answered, Ein la'achar kinyan klum. Once you do a kinyan, that's a done deal. So some people say that this is referring to the first case of yesterday, which was if you did a kinyan, and there was a shar that said you did a kinyan, once you do a kinyan, that's the end. And Shmuel said, no, it's not. Maybe you only want to do it with a shtar, and ein shtar la'achar mita. And according to Pubedita, Shmuel doesn't say that. According to Pubedita, Shmuel says ein la'achar kinyan klum, which, by the way, will resolve all the questions against Shmuel, right? Because that's not Shmuel's opinion. Okay, we had two questions against Shmuel. Does he really hold this? And each time we said, oh, it's a specific case where it was clear he was miyaped kocho, and it wasn't, it was clear there wasn't a concern about the shtar. But theoretically, you could resolve it very easily by saying that just wasn't what he said. But the Rashbam doesn't prefer that version. And the Rashbam prefers to say that this is it's not the same case. It's a variation of the case katav zika. And that it's in parallel to the last sugya, that when it says in Surah they taught it this way, is the case of the zich, right, katav zika. In Pumbedita, they learned it differently, meaning the case was different. If you say the case is different, then you don't say that Shmuel has a different version. It's just that Shmuel had an opinion about a different case, and they didn't say what Shmuel said in the original case. And then there's no disagreement here exactly. You could still say Shmuel would say that there and would say this here, because the case is not the same. So let's go to the case. According to the Rashbam in the second version, the second opinion of the Rashbam, where he explains this, he says it's a case where katav v'zika, okay, where he wrote the shtar, gave it to someone on behalf of someone else, but also did a kinyan chalipin. In other words, they add, it's katav, zika, and kinyan. And already, if you have that combo, where wrote a shtar, did this zichia, where it's different from the first case, where he just wrote the shtar and did a kinyan, but there was no zichia, where gave the shtar to someone to accept it on behalf of someone else. So if you have that combination of both writing the shtar, being zichia to the shtar, giving it to someone on behalf of the recipient, and doing a kinyan chalipin, then Shmuel says, ein la'achar kinyan klum. And then there's no disagreement with Shmuel about anything that was said before, because this is a totally different case than all the cases we saw before, because none of them had that combo. Okay, I don't think I've clarified that well enough yesterday. So now the Gemara says, Savor Mina, okay, starting with the beginning of our daf. Savor Mina, everybody knows, what does that mean? They thought to say. They inferred from Shmuel, but always when we have Savor Mina, in the end, they're going to be wrong, okay? The people who heard this psak thought, Hanimile la'achil, aval la'atzmo lo. Well, what was Shmuel saying? Shmuel said, Ein la'achar kinyan klum. If you do katav v'zika and kinyan, it's a done deal. But what was the katav v'zika case? It was where you first gave it to one person and then you decided to give it to someone else. So they thought that Shmuel was talking about that case. Just adding, if you did a kinyan with the first person, then instead of where Shmuel said Sheni Kana, if you change your mind about it, in this case, if you change your mind, it's too late and you want to give it to somebody else, you can't because you already did a kinyan and that makes it final. But la'atzmo, but let's say you were shchimira, you were about to die, and then you got better and you wanted to take the gift back. Well, Shmuel didn't say about that. Of course, Shmuel thought you could take it back because it was a mana shchimira and you could get that back, even if you did a kinyan. But Amar lahu Rav Chisda, ki ata Rav Huna mi Kufri, Persha, Rav Chisda said that when Rav Huna came from Kufri, he explained to us, everyone thought something, but then comes Rav Huna back into the scene, and he says to them, no, bein la'atzmo, bein la'acherim. No, he said, Shmuel said, this is a done deal. Ein la'achar kinyan klum, we take that literally. There is nothing to do after a kinyan, not for other people, not for yourself. Even yourself, you can't get it back, right? You can understand there might be a distinction. Right? When you give it to someone and it's a matter of this person or that person, so it's final. But when it's a matter of getting it back yourself, because all of a sudden you're better, maybe Shmuel didn't mean it, and comes Rav Huna from Kufri, and Rav Chisda is quoting him, saying, no, Shmuel actually said it. Once you do a kinyan, it's done. That means it's a gift starting from now, and you can't get that gift back. And now there was a case, adjudicated minei. Atu l'kamed Rav Huna, there was a person who did this. Okay, he did a kinyan with his, right? He did, I guess, katav, zika, and kinyan, and it came before Rav Huna. Then he got better. He wanted his money back. Amar, ma yavid lach de lo akni k'demaknu inashe. You didn't do it the way most people do it, and had you done it in the proper way, I would have been able to get it back for you. But you did it in this way, and there's nothing I could do about it. Sorry, but you can't get your gift back. Okay, next, now we're going to have another type of situation. And we're going to enter into a new machloka between Rav and Shmuel, the last one in our series. Hahu matanta davakatu ba bechayim ubemavet. This is a very interesting machloket. Somebody writes in the document, I'm giving this to you in life and in death. Now that's very confusing. If it's life, then it's a manabari. If it's death, it's a manachchimira. So how do we rule this case? And because we have a machloka Rav and Shmuel, it's obvious one's going to go on one side, one's going to go on the other. We view this as a gift upon death. And again, that means if you die, you don't die. If the person gets better, well, then they get it back. Shmuel says, no, this gift goes into effect from right now. Okay, by the way, I just want to remind you that in the beginning of the first case with the kinyan, Shmuel, right, Rav said we're going to treat it like a manabari, and Shmuel said like a manachchimira. Right, we're going to let it go. We're going to say it's as if the person was doing it because they thought they were going to die in ein shtalach harmita. Right, whereas here it's really not connected, the machlokot, because this is based on a totally different thing, and this is how do we understand the words in life and in death, and which word is the key word and which word was added for something else, for effect or for something else. So Rav Amar harei kemat nachchimera midichti ba b'mavet. Rav says it says in death. It means you want this to apply when you die. Which means if you didn't die because you got better, obviously you get it back. Achar mita ka'amrle, right? What you meant is b'mavet, when I die. Okay, what about this b'chayim? So why'd you write in life? Hai dechtiv b'chayim siman ba'alma dechaye. Okay, a person sitting there on their deathbed, they don't want to write a document that says when I die. It's like they feel like it's going to bring death closer. People are very superstitious about these things. So while they're writing when I die, they add the words in life, meaning I should live a long life. Okay, and I should get better from this disease. Shmuel Amar, Shmuel says, no. The key word is bechayim, and then he's going to have to explain them what's this and in death. Midachti ba bechayim, mechayim ka'amar. What it really means, bechayim, in life, what it means is from when I'm alive, meaning it's going to go into effect immediately no matter what happens to me. So why did this person write and in death? Like people say, till death do us part, right? It's saying forever. This will be, right? It's not exactly till death do us part, because that means, okay, that will be the end of it. This person saying, even when I die, it was just a phrase that uses it like that. What it means is, I want this to go into effect right now, and I want it to be so effective that even when I die, I don't want my heirs to come complain and say, oh, well, it reverts back to us. No, this is in death as well. This will be yours. Okay, so Very interesting machloket about how we understand these words. Nehardea, which I want to just already tell you, which will be important later in the story. Nehardea was where Shmuel lived, where he was the Rosh Yeshiva. And it's very strange, and I don't have an answer for this, but Hilchata Kavatei de Rav. They paskin like Rav, which is strange on two counts. Number one, it was the place where Shmuel lived. Number two, it was, in general, we hold like Shmuel when it comes to Dine Mamuno. When it comes to Isser V'Heter, we hold like Rav. That's the general ruling. Comes to Dine Mamuno, we hold like Rav. We hold like Shmuel. It's really a little strange that they held like Shmuel here, and particularly in the place where Shmuel was the rabbi. Okay, but anyway, that's the halacha. The halacha is paskin like Rav. We saw this, by the way, in another case where they paskin like Rav, and we raised the same question. I'm a Rava. Now comes Rava and says, I think that even Rav would agree with me, though, if there was a slight variation on the text. Iktiva, so he's basically doing a qualification of Rav, which we're going to see, though, that they don't buy his qualification. Okay, the rabbis don't agree, and they don't think that Rav would have said this, but Rava thinks that Rav would have said this. So what does he say? Ikata ba mechayim hana. Our thing was bechayim ubamavet, in life and in death. But if you say from life and in death, then you mean from life and to death, meaning, right, and even in death. That clearly is Shmuel then, right? Rav would agree with Shmuel that it means from now until even after I die, because you're saying you're adding the letter mem, which really is a full word in English, from, as opposed to in. You're switching it, right? Instead of in death, in life, from life. Amar Ameimar, late tilchata kavatei de Rava. So Ameimar comes and says, we do not hold like Rava. Amar le Rav Ashi la Ameimar pshita dahamrei Nehardea hilchata kavatei de Rav. And then Rav Ashi says to Ameimar, it's pretty obvious we don't hold like Rava because we already said that in Nehardea they hold like Rava. Rav didn't say this. So they say, no, what? Why is it not obvious? Because Ameimar wanted you to know, and this is kind of obvious what we're going to say, Ma'u detema mechayim modei Rav, kama shmana. Rava wasn't saying he disagreed with Rav and offering a different position. Rava was claiming that he thinks Rav would have agreed with this. And what Ameimar is coming to say is, no, we don't think Rav would have agreed with this. Okay, Ameimar said, Rav Ashi had said, I understand it's obvious we don't hold like Rava over Rav. But Ameimar is saying, well, you might have thought that Rav is just interpreting Rav, and maybe we go with his interpretation of Rav, and the answer is we don't. So now, before we get to our stories, I want to make it very clear where we hold. We paskin like Rav. Rav said, Bichayim or Mechayim, okay, either which language you use, you only meant the life to be there saying, I should live a long life, but it's really a matnat shchimera, and if you give it, it should revert back. So, Ha'uda'ata l'kamed Rav Nachman Nehardea, there was a case like this in Nehardea, where it said, this case could have been Bichayim or Mechayim, it doesn't really matter. Shadre l'kamed Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba. Now, the case came before Rav Nachman in Nehardea. I want to remind you, Rav Nachman holds usually like Shmuel. The problem is, well, there's two issues. Number one is in Nehardea, and in Nehardea they already paskin like Rav. But number two is in Nehardea, and in Nehardea it's Shmuel's territory, and it's really offensive to paskin like Rav in Shmuel's city. So Rav Nachman's in a bit of a quandary because it comes to him in Nehardea, and he feels like he should be ruling like Rav and return the money because it's a matnat shchimera and the person got better and should return the money to the original person. But he doesn't want to do that. So what does he do? Shadre l'kamed Rav Yirmiyah bar Abba. He sends the person who wants to get his money back to Rav Yirmiyah bar Abba l'shum timya, in a different place, shum tamya, to the place shum tamya, because he says, Amar hacha atra de Shmuel. This is the place of Shmuel. Hechi na'avi kavatei de Rav. How can I paskin like Rav in Shmuel's city? It's just not appropriate. So we didn't want to paskin, so he basically sends the person somewhere else, and therefore that, the person will get the right psak, but he won't be doing something that would be an affront to Shmuel. That's an interesting thing. But the next story is the most interesting. Okay, I'm going to remind you of a story. It's about a woman. Okay, Hahida Atai, just grammatically. Hahuda Ata is a man who comes. Hahida Atai is in the feminine. There's a woman who comes. Now, I'm going to remind you of a story in Gittin because it's very, very parallel. You'll probably remember this because it's one of my classic stories, and I highlighted it at the time, and we've come back to it a few times because there's always sugiyot that seem to be a little parallel. There's a woman who comes to the rabbi to get her ketubah. And there was an issue that Rav said we can't let widows get their ketubas. I'm not going to go into the whole reason there. Their big lump sum money of the ketuba, even though the ketuba is for widows. But there's a problem because widows were often swearing falsely, and he didn't want them taking a vow, which was the route that the rabbis instituted to get around the oath problem. They did neders, but he didn't want to do that either. So he wouldn't let women get their ketubas. So she goes to the court, and the Rav Huna rules like Rav and says, sorry, you can't get your lump sum ketubah, which means basically she could at least get mezonot. If you don't, it's not the biggest deal if you don't get your ketubah money because you're promised food payments every month. So then she says, fine, so give me my food payments. And then they said, oh, well, Shmuel holds that once you try to get your lump sum money, you go to court to issue a claim for your ketubah. Well, you're basically saying, I want to cut off myself from my husband's family to take the lump sum, and you don't get mezonot anymore. And she gets really angry because now she doesn't have her ketubah, she doesn't have her mezonot, and she's left on the streets high and dry. And she says, you're ruling me like two different people, either like Rav or like Shmuel. At least let me get something, but you're ruling like Rav and Shmuel. And she gets very angry and she curses him. And she says, your seat should be overturned. And the rabbis turn his chair upside down, hoping that will be the fulfillment of her curse. And in the end, basically, the curse comes true, and I think he dies at the end of the story. So it's a pretty crazy story. It shows a few things that we talked about then, and we're going to see all those same themes in this story, right? It shows that sometimes the rabbis didn't really think these women really understood what was going on, and she clearly understood what was going on. She said, what, you're ruling me like Rav, you're ruling me like Shmuel, and that's an unfair, right? That's not the way it works generally in halacha. Either you take one or you take the other, and you're doing like both, and that's really unfair. And she stands up for her rights. On the other hand, she's a little bit limited in what she can do, and therefore the only thing she has left to do is to curse, right? Because she can't bring a legal claim. They don't accept her claim, and she's kind of stuck, and you feel this frustration of the women of not being able to really express themselves and get what they want done in court. So in that light, we're going to read our story. There was a woman, Hahida Atai, Lekame de Rava. She comes before Rava. Now we have to remember, Rava says, now obviously the case was Mechayim, otherwise there wouldn't be a situation here. She wrote in her document, Mechayim ubemavid, right? From when I live until I die. And if you remember, Rava said, doesn't matter what language, Rav said, it doesn't matter what language you use. Anything of life was just, I hope I live a long life. And it's really in death. And therefore this woman was sick, right? Got better, wants her money back. According to Rav, which is the way that we're supposed to paskin, she should get her money back. But she ends up before Rava. And Rava is the one who said, if you use the word mechayim, it means from now. And your gift is effective. And you can't get your money back. So she comes before Rava, and obviously, Avila Rava Kishmate. Now, maybe you say it's not obvious. In the end, they reject Rava. Now, they reject Rava later. It's not clear what happened in their time period. And we're going to see that in the end, you already know, because I compared the stories, she's going to curse Rava. And some of the commentaries say Rava's curse was fulfilled, not just because a curse came, because if a curse is a false curse, it shouldn't really take effect. But both in that case, he really was being unfair to her and was leaving her high and dry. And in this case, Rava was passing like himself, even though everyone was against him, right? Rav didn't say that. And the psika was to go like Rav. And it wasn't really appropriate that Rava was ruling according to his opinion. So this woman was frustrated because she wanted her money back. And again, this is another woman being left high and dry. You have to remember, women in those days, it was harder for them to work and to find sustenance. And she was left with nothing because it was in Matnat Shchimera. She gave away everything. So she wants her money back. So she's frustrated. What is she doing, right? Women generally, either they scream, okay, because they have nothing to do. There's a lot of screaming women in the Gemara. Well, this woman, hakatardele, she kept pestering him. Okay, we don't know what she was doing, but she kept on pestering him in his face. You got to fix this problem. You got to fix this problem. I need my money back. He got frustrated. What did he do? Amar leila Rav Papa bereid Rav Hanan Safrei. He goes to Rav Papa, the son of Rav Hanan, the Sofer, and he says, Zil Ktovla, go write her a document. Uktov ba. Now, write her a document that says she gets the money. Okay, why he didn't do it himself, good question, but you'll see in a minute what he tells him to do. So far, it sounds good, right? Kind of like in the previous case where he said, I don't want to do it here. I'll have someone else do it for me. But he says, and here you have to remember another sugya, Uktov ba socher alehen o mita'an. And he writes that interesting. So I see, Ruth, you're telling me that the Schottenstein says that Rav Papa was Rava's scribe and that why he was the sofer, and maybe that's why he told him to do it. Okay, I see. It's Rav Papa was the son of Rav Hanan, and Rav Papa was the safre. He was the sofer, as opposed to he was the son of Rav Hanan safre. I read that perhaps incorrectly. Okay, so he goes to his sofer. That makes more sense. And he says, write the document. Okay, then it's not passing it on to someone else. Write the document, but right at the bottom, socher alehen ometaan. Now, what are these? These are four key phrases, four keywords. This brings us back to a sugya in Bava Metzia in hasocher ta'omnim. If you remember, when you hire someone, what do you say when you hire someone? When you If you hire someone and they renege on you at the last minute, and it's what we call davar ha'aved, like you have a wedding and you hire these people to play music at your wedding, and then they bag on you at the last minute. Now you're at the last minute, you have to go hire someone else. It's going to cost you a lot more money. So you have two options. These people are in the wrong for reneging on you. You can either hire them for double. Okay, you can either hire someone else for, let's say, double the money and make them pay the difference. Or that's socher alehen, or mita'an, or you can trick them. You can be deceptive and you can say, oh, I'll hire you for double the money. And then they'll say, oh, we'll do it for double the money. And then you don't have to give them double the money. So by adding these four words, what he was trying to do in a very surreptitious way, figuring she didn't learn Paraka Omnim of Bava Metzia, she doesn't know anything. So I'm just going to write at the bottom of these, tell the sofer to write at the bottom. Socher alehen omata'an. And then what will happen? Whoever gets this document, she tries to take the money, they'll realize that this is just a mita'an, right? It's just a ruse. It's not really a legitimate document. So that's what he does. And he does it just to get her off his case. Amra, well, she gets this right away. She knows the sugya and she's aware of what he's doing. And she says, Litba arbe, your boat should sink. At uye kamatile, you tricked me. Okay, and she understands it's a reference to the mita'an, right? Which is basically, I'm tricking her into believing this is true. And then she says, yeah, you tricked me, but I'm smarter than you and I know, and your boat should go down. Now, why your boat should sink is a good question. Here it's a little different than your chair should be overturned, which really he ended up dying. And in fact, what happens? It's the same as before. Shinu lamane de Rava b'maya. They took his clothes and they waterlogged them. They soaked them in water, hoping this would be like his boat drowning, like the clothes are, so to speak, drowning. Afilu hachi lo iprik mitiva, but he was not saved from his boat, and his boat drowned. Okay, so why the boat drowning? I don't know why a boat exactly, but I was thinking it's at least what she's getting at here are his the boat sank. Thank you, not drowned. The boat sank. I was thinking it's more like his money going right. She was trying to say you took my money away from me and wouldn't let me get it back, and therefore I'm hitting you in your money and your boat, which usually a boat also had. If he was a businessman, it had all sorts of merchandise on it, and that was a big loss for him. So she was trying to get him at where he got her in terms of leaving her without money. So interesting story. And again, like I said, the commentaries criticize Rava, that Rava really should have ruled like Rav and really should have given her money back. And he was in the wrong. Perhaps that's one way of looking at it. On the other hand, you could say that was his opinion. She should have gone to somebody else. You could say she was smart, but she wasn't smart enough because she should have gone to somebody else and not Rava himself. Perhaps she didn't know Rava's opinion about this. But anyway, an interesting story and connected with the other women's stories that we've seen, like the woman who also, they took her beam and they built a sukkah with it. She wants her beam back. Okay. New Mishnah. Lo kata b'shchivmera. Okay, now we're going to learn about the fact that in documents, okay, we mentioned this yesterday, that the documents would be written in the language of this person was on their deathbed. Okay, and we're going to see soon even, it would say, and they died. Because usually the witnesses would be there while they're on their deathbed. They would write the document after, and they would say, while the person was on their deathbed, they promised their money to so-and-so, so-and-so, and so, then they subsequently died. And that was usually the way they would write it. What if they didn't write anything? They didn't write it was a shchivmera, they didn't write it was a bari. That's what our Mishnah is addressing. And this is going to be like a sugya out of Bava Metzia, because they say this, and they say that, and we have mamon, who mutalbas safek, as we say, money that we don't know what to do with. So lo kata b'shchivmera, it didn't say it was a gift given on one's deathbed, so we don't know, was the person healthy? Did they think they were dying? No, were they dying? And again, what happens? They're now healthy and well, and they go before the court. And the person who was sick says, or claims he was sick. I was sick. I want my money back. I only gave it thinking I was going to die. The people who got the gift say it's ours, right? It was a gift. It was a regular gift. It wasn't a manat shchimera. So he says, I was sick on my deathbed. They say you were healthy. So classic, we have two people fighting over money. What do we do? Well, machloket, debate between Rabbi Meir and the rabbis. Rabbi Meir says the burden of proof is on the person who gave the gift. He has to prove, right? The default we assume is that he was healthy. And until he can prove otherwise, we assume he was healthy. Okay? Why? We're going to get into the machloket between them more in tomorrow's daf. As Tina, I see you're writing, we leave the money in the hands of who it is, which normally in this case will be in the hands of the giver, the person who claims that he or she was sick. So that person, the money's still there, right? Now the question is, does it get to stay with them or do they have to give it? So it stays with them. If for some reason the person given the money, well, then it would be the opposite, right? But generally the case is the giver hadn't given it yet, and therefore we assume the person was a shchid merah, at least halachically, right? We don't really know what to assume, but we leave the money where it is. So that's the debate right now, which we'll understand better tomorrow, the reason for their opinion. The Gemara now is going to get off on something else. And then from there, we're going to get to a different machloket Tanaim. And then tomorrow's daf, we're going to try to compare those two machlokot, but not for today. So for today, we're going to leave this Mishnah aside, although we're going to talk about similar things. There was a star that said, when I was, when this person was sick in bed dying, but it didn't say, as I mentioned before, and then the person died. So we have a star that's clear it's a matnat shchimera, but what's the problem? Well, the person then died. But what we don't know is, did the person die from that sickness when that time they were sick? Or is it possible they got better in between, which would then cancel the gift? The gift would be canceled, and then got sick a different time and died. So we don't have the facts and we don't know. Now, because normally it says in the star, and then the person died, and it didn't say that, we have possible reason to believe maybe the person didn't die from that sickness, because otherwise it would have been in the document. So turning now to Amar Rava says, Hare mate, v'hare kivro mochiach alav. Rava says, look at the facts. The fact is, he wrote it when he was, right, the document, he gave the gift when he was sick, and now he's dead, and his grave will prove it. That's the wording, right? He must have died from that disease. So we must assume, right, he was sick then, must have died, because he's dead now. So we go by what he is now, and we should say he's dead. So Abaye brings a certain argument. I'm going back now to boats, okay? I see you're saying about dating documents, but dates wouldn't help because he could have been sick for 5 months. He could have been sick, right? We don't know how long, but it could be he wrote it when he was sick 5 months ago, and he's still been sick that whole time from that, right? He was sick that whole time and died 5 months later. That would still be a manat shchimera. The question is, did he get better in between? That we don't know. So Abaye. Okay, so now because the person's dead now, we make an assumption that the person died from that same sickness. Abaye says, okay, now we're talking about a boat sinking again. But in this case, there's people on the boat. And the question is, did the people, often what happens is the boat sinks and we can't find the bodies, and we don't know, are the people alive? Are they dead? They could have, drifted off somewhere and gotten lost, and maybe are still alive. Now, masfina sheruban le'aved. Now, what's the rules of, we always go by rules of majority. Majority people who are in a boat that sunk probably died. Notnim alehem chumrei chayim v'chumrei metim. Well, even though we assume the majority are dead, we still have to assume when it comes to being machmir, we have to be more stringent and assume that maybe they're alive, or also assume that they're dead. In other words, whichever way goes l'chumra. We're going to basically be more stringent and assume maybe alive, maybe dead. Even though majority of people we assume die, we don't follow majority when it comes to this, and we have to be more stringent that maybe they're alive. One of the ramifications they talk about is a very specific one, like a woman who's a daughter of a Kohen and is married to a Yisrael. So if he were dead, she'd be able to eat truma back in her father's house. If he's alive, then she wouldn't be able to. right? So that's like a possible chumrei chayim. Without getting into the details, the main point being, rove, most people die, and yet we still have to be concerned that maybe the person is alive. Well, cholim, when it comes to sick people, and this we've talked about before, we haven't yet seen it inside, sherov cholim l'chayim, okay? Against what we might have thought, in those days, still most people who get sick actually get better. Okay, and again, this makes us rethink what we think of someone on their deathbed. It could just be someone who's sick and thinks they're going to die, like that woman who kept thinking she was going to die all the time and kept giving her pardes to the brother. So we basically say here that most people, we assume, who are sick actually get better. So if that's the case, if there we're concerned for the minority, shouldn't here we just go by the majority and say, right? All the more so when there's a majority that says most people get better, lo kol sheken, all the more so we should assume then, since the majority of people who are sick get better, why don't we just assume that this person must have gotten better because they were sick? And then, even though they're dead now, we can assume that in the interim, they might have gotten better. So therefore, Abai disagrees with Rava's psak. So in order now to resolve it, Amar Rav Huna Bered Rav Yoshua, Keman az lahashmate de Rava, ke Rabbi Natan. Rav Natan, the son of Rav Yoshua, says, Rabba holds like Rabbi Natan. And that's why Rabba says what he says. Even though Abai has a good claim, Rabba's holding by a certain Tanaitic approach. And we're going to see this machloka Tanaim, and then we're going to see that it applies in a different case as well. And then tomorrow we're going to go back to our Mishnah and possibly connect between this machloket and the machloket in the Mishnah. So now we're going to get into a different machloket, even though it's really on the same topic, but their opinions don't sound exactly the same as the rabbis and Rabbi Meir. And like I said, we'll get back to this. We're now like on a total tangent because we left the Mishnah. We started talking about this case that happened, Rava's psak, Abayi's question, and then we're going to have a resolution by bringing this machloket Tanaim about a case very, very much like the case in our Mishnah. So the Braita doesn't tell you what the case is, but commentaries say it's a case like our case, where like the Mishnah. What was the Mishnah, if you remember? It was a document that didn't say anything. Not that the person was sick, not that the person was a shchid meirah. So it doesn't say the person was a shchid meirah, and we don't know what the story is. And comes, the person claims, I was sick when I wrote it. I thought I was dying. I want my money back. And the recipients of this document say, no, the document's written to us, and the person was healthy. So mi motzi miyad mi. So the language is different than the language in the Mishnah, but it's the same basic question. Who can get the money out of who? So who motzi miyadehem? If they already got the money, the person who claims he was sick, she was sick, and get the money back. Below raya, without any proof. They can claim money goes back to us. Vehain ein motzi miyado ela beraya. But if they want to get the money out of the giver, the recipients, they can't do that unless they have a proof. Divrei Rabbi Yaakov. That's Rabbi Yaakov. What's Rabbi Yaakov based on? Rabbi Yaakov is based on what we call chezkat mare kama, which means things remain we have a situation of doubt, and we have to figure out what do we do. So there's different chazakot, as we say. There's different, right? Those who were in the beginner's class last night, the last class, it was one of the main topics was chazaka. Chazaka is a certain presumption. Okay, chazaka can mean different things in different contexts. Chazaka is a certain presumption. We make a certain presumption. Now, this presumption is a chezkat mare kama. If we don't know what to do with money, we give it to mare as owner, kama is first. It goes back to the first owner. So who owned this in the first place? The giver. So it goes back to the giver just because if we don't know what to do, we go back to the last known time that we knew something. And what was that? Before this gift was given, it was owned by the giver. So the giver gets it back. That's his assumption. And that's why the giver can take it away from them. This has nothing to do with hamotzim chavero alav haraya, because he can take it away from them and they can't take it from him. Because he has a chazaka, okay? He's maybe it is like hamotzim chavero alav haraya, but you want to get it out from the person who has the earliest, and whoever has the earliest chazaka, presumption, even though if it's not in his property right now, usually a motzim mechaper alav haraya means if you want to get it out of their hands right now. But what this is saying is the chazaka is with him, or her. The first original owner has the strength, and if you want to get it out of that person, the burden of proof is on you. Rabbi Natan Omer, we go by what we're going to call this. I'm going to say it in a different language, the language that Rishonim use, chazaka dahashta. We go by the chazaka of now, where's the money? Or not really, okay, I shouldn't say that. It's not now, where is the money? Okay, the first chazaka was relating to the money. Who was the owner of the money or the possession? And that was who was the original owner. This is going by, we go based on the chazaka of what's the status of the person now. And the chazaka is on the person, not on the money. So what do we say? In barihu, if right now when it gets to court, the person is healthy, alav lavi rayasha, the burden of proof is on the giver to prove that the giver was sick at the time. Im shchimerahu, if the person right now is sick, alehen lavi raya, and I guess is claiming that, I was a shchimera before and then I got better, alehen lavi raya shebarihaya. So the burden of proof is on them to say he was healthy at the time that it happened. So basically, we go by the chazaka of what status the person is now, and that determines what we assume was before. Interesting chazaka, because obviously we know that could change. Amar Rabbi Elazar. So now comes Rabbi Elazar and says, Ulituma kimachloket. The same machloket they have here, they would also have in this case of tuma that comes up in Masechet Tahachot. So first we have to learn the Mishnah. He actually doesn't tell you what their machloket is. You have to figure it out. But we're going to learn first the Mishnah in Tarot, and then we'll explain how they have the same machloket and where they would side in this machloket. Titna. Bik'abi imodachama. Okay, what we now have to define is, I'll give you some background. What is a private domain? When is something that's kind of in a public space considered to be a private domain? There's two important halachot that are important for determining if something is a private or a public domain. One is for Masechet Shabbat, right? For carrying, for moving something from a private domain to a public domain. Or there's all sorts of halachot about moving from one domain to another. You have to know how it's defined as public or a private. Then there's another issue for impurity, right? Remember, we've learned this a whole bunch of times. It comes from the laws of sota. The sota is warned by her husband not to go into a room alone with a man. Then she goes into a room alone with a man. And she's called the sota at that point. Once she goes into the room alone with a man, we don't know what happened in that room. We don't have evidence that they have relations, but we already assume that she's nitma. Now we still have to go through the whole process of the sota waters, but if she doesn't, right, she's considered, she can't be with her husband that whole time after that. So where does that happen? That happens in a private domain. From there, the rabbis learn. Now, if she's with this man in a public space, it's irrelevant, right? We don't say now, the Torah, by the way, uses the lashon of nitma. It's not the same tuma. It's not purity, impurity, but it's the same language, which means we assume she had relations with him. But if in a public domain, we don't. Okay, now that's obvious why we distinguish between private and public there. But the interesting thing is they take this to laws of tuma and tara, which means if a person walks through a field where we know there's a dead body there, but we don't know if the person walked over the dead body. Now, if you walk over a dead body, right, the bones, the tumah goes up and you'll be impure. But you don't know, it's a suffix. So if it was in a private domain, then we rule strictly, like the sota, and we call you tameh. If it was in a public space, we say you're tahor, you're pure. We don't say you're impure. So therefore, it's very important to define a space, is it private or public for cases of suffix impurity. So a bik'ah, we have this field or valley area. B'yamot hachama, in the summer months where people walk through all the time, reshut hayachid l'shabbat or reshut harabim l'tumah. Okay, now the assumption is we have a field that's surrounded with a fence. Okay, it's fenced in, but it's a space that people walk through all the time. So it's a private domain when it comes to Shabbat because it's fenced around, and those are the criteria for Shabbat. But when it comes to public, we're going to call this public if it's in the summer months, because in the summer months, everybody walks through because I think the issue with the summer is that, number one, it's not muddy and swampy. And also, I think because the crops aren't growing then. When the crops are growing, right, no one's going to trample through. I think it has to do with that also. Okay. Yeah. Anyway, let me just look. Some new comments. Dear Saviv, Afilu Karpav. Yeah. The Rashbam says there's Zra'im. Okay, there's seeds growing there, so nobody walks through in the winter. You think of all those places where they say, don't trample there, you're going to trample on people's crops, right? So people respected that. So if it's in the winter, okay, so in the summer, we're going to call this a Reshut HaRabim. because public, because everybody walks through, which means that if you walk through and there was a dead body somewhere and you don't know if you passed over the dead body, we're going to say you're pure. But in the winter months where people are careful not to walk through. So it's also got a fence around it and people don't walk through. We're going to call this private domain for both issues. And then if you walk through, you're actually going to be deemed impure because it's safek tuma in a private space. What does this have to do with our machloket of Rabbi Natan and Rabbi Yaakov? So what this has to do is, what if you're not sure? Let's say you go to ask a question. You say, I walked through this field, but you don't know, you don't remember, was it the summer or the winter when you walked through? So if you don't know, what do we do? So if you go by Rabbi Yaakov, who says we go by chezkat mari kama, we go by the original presumed assumption. Now, here again, what's the comparison to the money? Well, the person. Is the person pure or impure? What were you before you walked through? You were pure. So we go back to your presumed status from before, which is pure. So you're going to be pure if you're not sure. According to Rabbi Natan, we go by your status now, whatever it is now. So that means if you ask the question and you go to the court when it's the summer, we're going to rule like the summer. And we're going to say you're pure because it's public space. If you go in the winter, we're going to rule by the winter. So that's the machloket here that Rabbi Elazar is saying. It's the same machloket. The last point we're going to make is something that Rava says. Whether this also connects with the machloket of Rabbi Natan, Rabbi Yaakov is a subject of debate. Some people say this is just connected to the sugya there about the tumah, has nothing to do with this debate. So we'll go with that. Amar Rava lo shanu ela shelo avru alav yimorag shamim. Aval avru alav yimorag shamim b'shurei achid lekan ulekan. Comes Rava and he says, wait. When we said that in the summer we're going to call this Reshut HaRabim, that's only if it was the first summer after you put in the fence. But if you went through a whole winter season and it got defined as a private domain because people didn't walk through in the winter, then that continues that status. You can't keep every season switching it private, public, private, public. If it starts off in the summer and you put in the fence and people are still walking through, we'll call that a public space. But once it goes through a winter and becomes private, forever it's now deemed a private space for impurity. So that's what Rava says. Okay, so that's the end of our daf. Like I said, tomorrow we're going to get to, is this machloket connected to the machloket of the rabbis and Rabbi Meir, which we really left their whole machloket aside, and we'll come back to it tomorrow. It's a bit of a strange Gemara because it basically started off, right, although that happens often, where they bring something else, which is going to eventually connect to our Mishnah. Sometimes it just takes a little shorter to get there. We had a whole Amud till we get back to our topic. So we started with this other version of Shmuel and Nehardea about Zikah and did a kinyan, right? You wrote a star, gave it to someone and did a kinyan, and there Shmuel said, done deal. And then they thought that meant only as if there was someone else you gave it to, but even to yourself, they said in the end, you can't ever get that back. And then we went into the case of Bechayim u'b'maved and Mechayim b'maved, and then we saw the difference between Rava. We tried to define Rav, but we didn't go with that. We had the machloket first, Rav and Shmuel. We hold like Rav and not according to Rava's definition, but then we had that case, right? We had two cases really. One where he said, I don't want to rule here against Shmuel, even though really we should rule against Shmuel, but it's not appropriate. So go deal with it somewhere else. And then we had the case with the woman. Basically, Rava ruled like his psak and messed the woman up that she wouldn't get her money back, and she got very angry, and he got cursed. Then we went to this case where a document, we get to a classic case of safek mamonot because the document didn't say whether the person was sick on their deathbed when the document was written, and we have a machloka between the two sides. Who gets it, right? Machloka, Rabbi Meir and the rabbis. Rabbi Meir says he has to bring proof. The giver has to bring proof that the giver was actually a shchib merah, and the rabbis say, no, it goes by where the money is. Okay, which likely the money is in the giver's hand, and therefore the giver doesn't have to give it up. And then we got to this case where it said the person was sick, but didn't say they died. And then the question was, do we assume they died from the same sickness? Which Rabba rules yes, and Abai says, if most people, right, if we even follow minority to be stringent, we should follow majority here, which is most people get better after they get sick, and therefore it was likely the person got sick, got better, the gift was canceled, and now died. So the children, the heirs should be in the right here. And basically Rav Huna explains the reason is because Rabba was holding like Rabbi Natan. And Rabbi Natan said, we go by the status now. Now the person's dead, So we assume they died from the same sickness. And then we had Rabbi Yaakov, who basically had a different approach, which is we go by the original status. Okay, what the person, right? So it would be in the money case, right? Where the money was first, and therefore it would stay with the giver, right? Whereas Rabbi Nata would we go with the status of now, and right. So that was the whole question of who can be motzi miyad mi, and Rabbi Natan said it just really depends on whether the person's well or sick at this given point. And then we said, and by the way, the same machlokes they have there, they have when it comes to impurity as well. With that, we finish for today. Wishing everyone a good day. Hopefully, it will be a quieter day than yesterday.